So, after a couple of discussions today, I decided to create an additional video to kind of highlight some other parts of the stuff that we are going to, that'll help you prepare for your test, open note test on Monday. One of the things that I wanted to highlight um, is your thesis statement. So up here at the top, the time period is not democratic. That's considered your time period, or that is considered your thesis statement. And that thesis statement could be that it is democratic. It's whatever you choose. But this is your the kind of big overarching point is your thesis statement. Then what you're going to do is decide, once you have made your decision, what are examples that are not democratic, if that's what your thesis, your argument is going to be, then you're going to want your examples to be things that would support that it's not democratic. And then, you just need a couple of sentences. So if your first example is going to be the Dred Scott ruling, then you would explain it was not democratic because, and then you would explain why it's not democratic. So you want to make sure that whatever example you use, that it actually supports it, and you describe. You don't need to describe a lot about each event because we're going to try to make this a short test, but you do need to describe how it relates to democracy or does not relate. It relates to democracy either being undemocratic or not. One of the things that we also talked about in class today is that you could also argue that some of it was democratic by talking about the people themselves. So you might talk about how Nat Turner, his actions and the way it resulted wasn't so democratic, but the way he was trying to be the democracy might be something that that he was trying to assert his power and all of that. Another person example might be Dred Scott, where he and his actions were democratic, but the way that it ruled wasn't so democratic. So those are kinds of things that might be a little bit nuanced examples. One way that you can prepare for this is to either make a T-chart. So you can make a T-chart that says, that goes like that, not democratic. And then over here have the list of democratic events, and then list all of the events. So this is a really good way to prepare. If you don't want to do it that way, I showed you in class, you can draw buckets, and then have one be a democratic bucket and one be a not democratic bucket. And so, if event like Uncle Tom's Cabin is democratic, it would go in this bucket. Something like the Dred Scott ruling. Okay, so Dred Scott himself would be something. Something you've got to decide, right, is where John Brown and his raid goes. You could argue that most events are not democratic. I talked about in the last video how Kansas-Nebraska Act could go in democratic, but the fact is only Euro-American males got to vote. So it could go over here on this side, or it could go on this side. There's a lot of questions over what that is. So once you've come up with all of your events and realize, let's say you realize that you've got so many more on this side, you've got 12 different facts and you've got, 2 facts over here, then obviously you're going to want to say that this event was not democratic, and then you're going to have your reasons why. So just to kind of think about planning this part is planning. You can either do it in the T-chart format or you can do it in drawing a bucket format. And then you want to be able to take that information and be able to plan out what's your argument going to be and then what are the examples. We also talked about at the end, you want to be able to argue the opposite side. So if your argument is that it's not democratic, you want to be able to argue that some still were, and what would those examples would be, and then conclude with this time period was still not very democratic. So again, a structure to kind of help you plan out. You again can delete this and say this time period is democratic. Then you would say it's democratic because, and then you would change this. So they are democratic, and there were some that were not. Okay, and this time period was still more democratic. You can't really say that it's truly democratic because women, original Americans, and Mexican Americans still cannot vote. Neither can African Americans. The time period that we're talking about is about 1820 to 1860. And so you get to decide whether it's going to be not democratic or whether it's going to be democratic. That is your choice, but you just want to make sure that when you do that, that you change the all of your words to match that, right? So that's where you get to make those decisions. Some additional things for the we said the Kansas-Nebraska Act. Only Euro-Americans voted, right? The compromise of 18, all the compromises, only Euro-American males, and this one too, males voted, voted and elected people to our big important branch, Congress. So those are some pieces of evidence that you might want to include. So hopefully overall this will give you some things to think about and how you can really be successful.